The screaming started at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. By the time the ambulance sirens faded, 8-year-old Tommy Martinez had 17 stitches, Karen Blackwood had lawyer bills she couldn't afford, and Dr. Elena Martinez, respected entomologist, and mother, had already ordered 5 million fire ants online. Because sometimes, when the system fails your child, you have to let nature deliver the justice that courts won't. Dr. Elena Martinez was elbow-deep in grant applications when the screaming shattered her concentration. Not the usual playground, squeals from the neighborhood kids, but something primal, pure terror wrapped in a child's voice. Her coffee mug hit the floor, ceramic exploding across her home office tiles as she bolted toward the sound. The screaming was coming from next door, from the Blackwood property where that woman Karen let her Pitbull roam loose despite 3 formal complaints to animal control. Elena vaulted the low fence separating their yards, her lab-trained reflexes, kicking in as she processed the scene in clinical detail. Tommy, her Tommy, was on the ground. Karen's 90-pound Pitbull, Bruno, latched onto his left arm. Blood soaked through his yellow soccer jersey, spreading like spilled wine across cotton. "Get off him!" Elena's voice cracked as she grabbed the nearest weapon, a rusted garden rake leaning against Karen's shed. She brought it down hard across Bruno's back. The dog yelped but didn't release. Elena struck again, this time across the snout. The dog finally let go, backing away with Tommy's blood still dripping from his muzzle. Tommy's arm hung at an unnatural angle, bone visible through torn flesh. His face had gone the color of ash, shock setting in fast. "Mom?" His voice was small, confused. "Mom, I can't feel my fingers." Elena's hands shook as she stripped off her cardigan, wrapping it around. The worst of the wounds. Pressure, elevation, keep him conscious. Her scientific training battled with maternal panic. "Where the hell is Karen?" she muttered, scanning the empty yard. The back door to the Blackwood house remained closed, curtains drawn. Either Karen was hiding or she wasn't home to control her damn dog. "I'm calling 911, Elena said, fumbling for her phone with blood-slick fingers. "You're going to be okay, baby. Mama's here." But as she dialed, Bruno circled back, growling low in his throat. The rake lay too far away now. Elena positioned herself between the dog and her son, her 5'4" frame suddenly feeling insignificant. "Easy, boy," she whispered. "Easy." The dog lunged. Elena threw herself sideways, Bruno's teeth catching her shoulder instead of her throat. Pain exploded through her arm, but she managed to roll away, putting more distance between the dog and Tommy. "Bruno, get back here!" Karen Blackwood finally emerged from her house, wearing a bathrobe and holding a coffee cup like this was any other Tuesday afternoon. She was a large woman in her 50s, with bottle blonde hair and the kind of permanent scowl that suggested the world owed her something. "Oh, for crying out loud," Karen muttered, not even looking at Tommy's mangled arm. "Bruno, come here right now." The dog trotted over obediently, tail wagging. "Your dog nearly killed my son." Elena's voice pitched higher, shock giving way to rage. Karen finally glanced at Tommy, her expression more annoyed than concerned. "Kids shouldn't be in my yard without permission. Bruno was protecting his territory." "He was on the sidewalk, Karen, the public sidewalk." "Well, maybe next time he'll know better." Karen shrugged, turning back toward her house. "Bruno's had all his shots, if that's what you're worried about." Elena stared at the woman's retreating form, unable to process such casual indifference. Tommy's whimpers snapped her back to reality. The ambulance sirens were getting closer. At the hospital, Elena held her son's good hand while Dr. Rodriguez explained the damage. Torn muscles, severed tendons, possible nerve damage. Tommy would need surgery, physical therapy, maybe multiple procedures. His dreams of Little League were over before they'd really begun. "Will I be able to write?" Tommy asked through his morphine haze. "We'll do everything we can," Dr. Rodriguez said gently. Elena squeezed her son's fingers, the ones that still had feeling. "Of course you will, baby. Everything's going to be fine." But she was lying, and they both knew it. 3 hours later, while Tommy slept off the anesthesia, Elena sat in the hospital parking garage and called animal control for the 4th time in 2 months. "Ma'am, we understand your concern, but without witnesses to the attack." "I'm a witness! My son is in surgery!" "Did you actually see the dog leave the Blackwood property?" Elena closed her eyes. Tommy had been walking home from school, cutting through the alley that ran behind both their houses. Technically, he'd been on Karen's side of the property line when Bruno attacked. "The dog was loose and unsupervised," Elena said carefully. "We'll send someone out to document the incident, but unless there's evidence of negligence..." Elena hung up. She'd heard this script before. Karen would get a warning, maybe a small fine. Bruno would be quarantined at home for 10 days. Then life would go on as normal. The system was designed to protect property owners, not 8-year-old boys with severed tendons. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Maria. "How's Tommy? Do you need anything?" Elena typed back. "Surgery went well. He'll be okay." Another lie. Tommy might recover physically, but the psychological damage was harder to measure. He'd already started flinching when dogs barked in the distance. She was still sitting in her car when Karen Blackwood walked out of the hospital's main entrance, flanked by a man in an expensive suit. Elena rolled down her window to catch their conversation. "Completely frivolous lawsuit," the lawyer was saying. "The boy was trespassing. We have grounds for a countersuit if they want to play hardball." "Good," Karen replied. "I'm not paying for some kid's clumsiness. Bruno's a good dog. It's not his fault the boy got in his way." Elena watched them disappear into the parking garage, rage building in her chest like pressure in a boiler. Karen had hired a lawyer before even checking if Tommy was alive. That night, Elena sat at her computer researching personal injury attorneys and dog bite laws. But every legal blog, every consultation, told her the same thing. Without clear evidence of negligence, her case was weak. Karen's property, Karen's rights. The fact that Bruno had been loose meant nothing if Tommy was technically trespassing. She was about to close her laptop when a Google ad caught her eye. "Fire ant colonies for research. Solenopsis invicta. Ships nationwide." Elena stared at the screen, her scientific mind automatically cataloging what she knew about fire ants. Aggressive, territorial, nearly impossible to eliminate once established. They could strip a carcass to bone in hours, and their stings caused lasting welts that burned like acid. She thought about Karen's perfectly manicured backyard, about the woman's beloved prize-winning roses, about Bruno's dog run where he liked to sunbathe. Her cursor hovered over the link. Just browsing, she told herself. Research purposes. But even as she clicked, Elena knew she was lying again. And this time, she didn't feel guilty about it. The website loaded, showing colony sizes, shipping, options, and care instructions. 5 million ants, guaranteed live delivery, established colony with multiple queens. Perfect for large-scale habitat introduction studies. Elena read the fine print twice, memorizing every detail. Then she reached for her credit card, Tommy's bandaged form sleeping peacefully in the room down the hall. Karen Blackwood thought. The law was on her side. But Karen had never dealt with a woman who understood that nature had laws of its own, older, harsher, and absolutely unforgiving. Dr. Elena Martinez clicked Add to Cart with a smile that would have made her colleagues deeply uncomfortable. Because sometimes when civilization fails, you have to trust evolution to restore the balance. The package arrived on a Thursday, unmarked except for air holes and a biohazard sticker that made the UPS driver nervous. Elena signed for it with steady hands, her professional demeanor masking the electric anticipation coursing through her veins. Inside her garage, she opened the shipping container with the reverence of someone handling explosives. 5 separate queen chambers, each containing roughly 1 million fire ants in various stages of development. The accompanying documentation was thorough: feeding schedules, humidity requirements, territorial expansion patterns. Elena had spent 3 sleepless nights researching Solenopsis invicta behavior. Fire ants were survivors, adaptable to almost any environment. Once established, they were nearly impossible to eradicate. They'd spread across the southern United States like a plague, devastating local ecosystems and causing billions in agricultural damage, perfect for her purposes. "Mom?" Tommy's voice drifted from the kitchen. "What's in the garage?" "Research. Specimens, honey," Elena called back, carefully sealing the containers. "Stay inside, okay? Some of these insects bite." Tommy's physical therapy wasn't going well. His left hand remained weak, fingers curling involuntarily. The doctors spoke in careful euphemisms about adaptive strategies and alternative approaches. Translation: Tommy would never pitch again, never write with his dominant hand, never be the same kid who'd walked home from school 6 weeks ago. But Karen Blackwood was doing just fine. Elena watched her neighbor through the kitchen window most mornings, saw her tending to her precious roses while Bruno lounged in his pen. The dog seemed completely unaffected by the incident, tail wagging, whenever children passed on the sidewalk. The legal situation had deteriorated exactly as Elena predicted. Karen's lawyer had filed a motion to dismiss, claiming Tommy was trespassing and that Bruno had acted within his rights as a guard dog. Elena's attorney, a earnest young man named David Chen, had warned her that even if they won, the settlement would barely cover Tommy's medical bills. "These cases are difficult," Chen had explained during their last meeting. "Proving negligence requires demonstrating that Mrs. Blackwood knew her dog was dangerous and failed to take reasonable precautions." Elena had wanted to laugh. 3. Formal complaints to animal control weren't enough evidence? A 90-pound Pitbull running loose in a residential neighborhood wasn't dangerous? But she'd nodded politely and shaken Chen's hand, knowing she'd already found a more reliable form of justice. Now, kneeling in her garage among ant colonies worth more than her car, Elena felt a calm she hadn't experienced since the attack. This was her element: controlled environments, predictable variables, measurable outcomes. She'd spent 2 weeks surveying Karen's yard, noting patrol patterns, sprinkler schedules, and Bruno's daily routine. Karen left for work at 7:30 a.m. sharp, returning around 6 p.m. The dog spent most days outside, weather permitting. The backyard was enclosed by a 6-foot privacy fence, invisible from the street. Elena had also identified the optimal release points. Fire ants preferred sandy soil, with good drainage, and Karen's prize rose garden fit the criteria perfectly. The elaborate irrigation system would help distribute the colonies, while the existing landscape provided natural barriers to contain initial expansion. The irony wasn't lost on Elena. Karen's meticulously maintained yard, her pride and joy, would become the perfect habitat for an invasive species. Friday morning, Elena called in sick to the university for the first time in 5 years. She waited until Karen's BMW disappeared down the street, then gathered her supplies: the ant colonies, a detailed site map, and a small spade from Tommy's abandoned sandbox. "I'm going to run errands," she told Tommy, who was struggling through homework with his right hand. "Mrs. Patterson next door will check on you." Tommy looked up from his crooked handwriting. "Are you okay, Mom? You've been acting weird lately." Elena knelt beside his chair, smoothing his hair. "I'm just tired, baby. Everything's going to get better soon." Another lie, but this one felt different. This one might actually come true. Karen's backyard was accessed through a gate hidden behind overgrown jasmine. Elena had tested the latch weeks ago during a neighborly visit to discuss the ongoing legal proceedings. Karen had been surprisingly hospitable, probably following her lawyer's advice to appear reasonable. "I feel terrible about what happened," Karen had said, serving sweet tea in crystal glasses. "But you understand, Bruno's just protecting his territory. It's instinct." Elena had smiled and nodded, memorizing the gate's position while Karen droned on about property rights and personal responsibility. Even then, Elena had been planning this moment. Now, slipping through the gate with her biological cargo, Elena felt like a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. Each colony had to be placed strategically, close enough to establish territorial overlap, far enough apart to prevent immediate warfare between competing queens. The first release point was beside Karen's prized David Austin roses, where the irrigation system created ideal moisture conditions. Elena used her spade to create a small depression, then carefully poured the first colony into their new home. The ants immediately began exploring, scouts fanning out to assess their territory. Colony 2 went near the vegetable garden Karen bragged about to anyone who'd listen. Colony 3 beside the deck where Karen hosted her monthly book club meetings. Colony 4 near Bruno's water bowl. Colony 5, the largest with 2 queens, directly under the outdoor dining set where Karen entertained clients. Elena worked quickly but methodically, covering each release site with a thin layer of mulch to disguise the disturbance. To casual observation, the yard looked exactly the same. But beneath the surface, 5 million fire ants were beginning, the process that would transform Karen's paradise into something else entirely. The whole operation took 47 minutes. Elena was washing her hands in her kitchen sink when Karen's BMW pulled into the driveway. Through the window, she watched. Her neighbor gathered grocery bags from the trunk, chatting on her phone about some client meeting. No, the Peterson contract is fine, Karen was saying. We'll close next week, weather permitting. I want to show them the backyard. It's really my selling point, you know? Elena smiled, drying her hands with deliberate care. Karen was a real estate agent who specialized in luxury properties, using her own immaculate home as a showcase for potential buyers. Her backyard had been featured in the local Home and Garden magazine just last spring. That evening, Elena sat on her back porch with a glass of wine, ostensibly reading but actually observing. Already she could see increased ant activity around the first colony. Fire ants were notorious for their rapid expansion rate. A single colony could spread across an acre within months under ideal conditions. Tommy joined her as the sun set, settling carefully into the chair beside hers. His left arm was still in a partial cast, but he'd learned to manage most daily activities. "Mom, why hasn't Mrs. Blackwood's dog been put down?" he asked quietly. Elena looked at her son, really looked at him. The attack had aged him, carved worry lines around his eyes that belonged on an adult face. He'd developed a stutter that emerged whenever he was stressed, and he hadn't played outside alone since the incident. "Because life isn't always fair, sweetheart," Elena said carefully. "Sometimes bad things happen to good people, and there's no punishment for the ones who cause it." "That's stupid." "Yes, it is." Tommy was quiet for a long moment, watching Karen's house. Lights were on in the kitchen, and they could see her moving around, probably making dinner for one. "Do you think karma is real?" Tommy asked. Elena considered her answer. 3 days ago, she would have given him some variation of "good things happen to good people if you work hard and follow the rules." But Tommy had followed the rules. He'd walked on the sidewalk, hadn't provoked the dog, had done nothing to deserve 17 stitches and a lifetime of physical limitations. "I think," Elena said slowly, "that sometimes karma needs help." That night, Elena dreamed of fire ants, covering everything: Karen's roses, Bruno's food bowl, the deck chairs where Karen sipped her morning coffee. In the dream, Karen was screaming, just like Tommy had screamed, while millions of insects swarmed over her perfectly manicured paradise. Elena woke up smiling. The first scream came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, exactly 3 weeks after Elena's midnight gardening expedition. She was making Tommy's breakfast when Karen's voice shattered the morning quiet. A sharp, panicked shriek that sent coffee splattering across Elena's counter. Through the kitchen window, Elena watched Karen stumble across her back deck in bare feet and a silk nightgown, swatting frantically at her legs. Even from 50 yards away, Elena could see the angry red welts spreading across Karen's calves, like a connect-the-dots puzzle. "What's wrong with Mrs. Blackwood?" Tommy asked, joining Elena at the window. His speech therapy was helping with the stutter, but he still spoke carefully, like someone testing each word before releasing it. "She must have stepped on something," Elena said, fighting to keep her voice neutral. Inside, triumph bloomed like a flower opening to sunlight. Karen was on her phone now, probably calling 911. Elena watched her neighbor pace the deck, still, brushing at her legs, her usually perfect hair flying wild around her face. The fire ant colonies had exceeded even Elena's optimistic projections, What had started as 5 discrete populations had merged into a super colony covering nearly half of Karen's backyard. The transformation had been subtle at first. Elena had documented the progression with the dedication of a true scientist, noting territorial expansion rates and population density changes. By week 2, the ants had established major highways between colonies, those distinctive trails of disturbed earth that fire ants used for rapid deployment. By week 3, they'd begun their assault on Karen's prized landscaping. The roses went first. Elena had watched through binoculars as thousands of ants stripped the bushes systematically, devouring everything from aphids to root systems. Karen had initially blamed the damage on grubs, hiring an expensive pest control service that sprayed uselessly while the real problem multiplied underground. Now, standing at her kitchen window with Tommy beside her, Elena felt a satisfaction so pure, it was almost spiritual. Karen Blackwood was finally experiencing what it felt like to be attacked by something she couldn't control. "Mom," Tommy said quietly, "are those fire ants in her yard?" Elena looked down at her son, surprised by his perceptiveness. "What makes you think that?" "We studied them in science class. Mrs. Peterson said they're really aggressive and hard to get rid of." Tommy paused, studying his mother's face. "And you've been reading a lot about them lately. I saw the books in your office." Elena felt her carefully constructed facade wavering. "You're very observant. Did you put them there?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke. Elena could lie, should lie, but something in Tommy's expression stopped her. He wasn't horrified or frightened. If anything, he looked curious, maybe even impressed. "Would it bother you if I had?" Elena asked carefully. Tommy considered this, his 8-year-old mind working through implications that most adults would struggle with. "She hurt me," he said finally, "and she didn't care. She said it was my fault." "Yes, she did. And her dog is still out there. He could hurt someone else." Elena nodded, watching Karen through the window. Her neighbor had grabbed a garden hose and was spraying her legs, which would only spread the formic acid from the ant stings and make the burning worse. "So no," Tommy said with quiet conviction. "It wouldn't bother me." Elena pulled her son against her side, marveling at his resilience. The attack had aged him, but it had also revealed a core of steel she hadn't known existed. Maybe that was Karen's real crime, not just the physical damage, but forcing a child to understand that the world was fundamentally unfair. "I love you, baby," Elena whispered into his hair. "I love you too, Mom. And I'm glad Mrs. Blackwood's yard is full of fire ants." By noon, Karen's backyard looked like a war zone. Elena counted 3 different pest control trucks in the driveway, their crews hauling industrial sprayers and wearing protective suits that made them look like astronauts. Karen paced her front lawn in designer jeans and hiking boots, gesturing wildly as she directed the assault on her insect invaders. Elena was deadheading petunias when Karen stormed over, her face flushed with fury and heat exhaustion. "This is your fault!" Karen jabbed a finger toward Elena's chest. "I know you did." "This did what?" Elena asked mildly, continuing to tend her flowers. "Those goddamn ants! They came from somewhere, and the only person with a motive is you." Elena straightened, fixing Karen with the same steady gaze she used on unruly graduate students. "Are you accusing me of something specific, Karen?" "I'm saying those ants didn't just appear overnight. Someone introduced them, and we both know who." "Do we?" Elena smiled, the expression sharp enough to cut glass. "Because what I know is that fire ants are common in this region. They spread naturally through suburban areas, especially in disturbed soil. Your recent landscaping projects probably created ideal conditions." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Tell me, Karen. Do you have any evidence that these ants came from an outside source? Any proof that someone deliberately introduced them to your property?" The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of industrial sprayers destroying what remained of Karen's garden. Elena could see the moment when Karen realized the trap she'd walked into. Even if she suspected the truth, proving intentional introduction of an invasive species would require forensic entomology, expert testimony, and a level of evidence that simply didn't exist. "You won't get away with this," Karen said finally. "Get away with what? Tending my garden while yours gets overrun by native wildlife?" Elena's smile widened. "Though I have to say, Karen, watching your property value plummet has been almost as satisfying as watching Tommy learn to write with his right hand." Karen's face went white. "You're insane." "No," Elena said softly. "I'm thorough. You see, fire ants don't just destroy landscaping. They nest in electrical systems, damage irrigation equipment, and make outdoor spaces completely uninhabitable. Your real estate business depends on showcasing that backyard, doesn't it? Those client meetings you host by the pool?" Elena gestured toward the chaos behind Karen's house, where men in hazmat suits were retreating from a particularly aggressive swarm. "I'd estimate your property just lost about 30% of its value," Elena continued. "More, once word, spreads about the infestation. Fire ants have a way of becoming neighborhood problems, you know. They spread to adjacent properties, damage municipal systems. Some homeowners associations actually ban the sale of infested properties." Karen staggered backward, the full implications hitting her like physical blows. "Of course," Elena added, thoughtfully, "there are treatment options, expensive ones. I've read that eliminating an established super colony can cost upward of $50,000, assuming you can find someone willing to guarantee results. Most companies won't, you know. Too much liability." "You're destroying my life," Karen whispered. Elena felt something cold and final settle in her chest. "No, Karen. I'm giving you exactly what you gave my son. An injury that will never fully heal, and a system that won't help you recover from it." As if summoned by their conversation, Bruno appeared at the gate leading to the backyard, whimpering and pawing at his snout. Even from a distance, Elena could see the welts covering the dog's face and legs. "Oh, God!" Karen rushed toward her pet. "Bruno, baby, what happened?" Elena already knew. Fire ants were opportunistic hunters, and a large animal stumbling through. Their territory was just another threat to be neutralized. Bruno had probably been investigating the strange activity in his domain when he'd walked into a feeding swarm. The dog's whimpers carried clearly across both yards, high-pitched and desperate. Tommy appeared at Elena's elbow, drawn by the sound. "Is Bruno hurt?" he asked. Elena watched Karen cradling her 90-pound Pitbull like a baby, both of them, covered in angry red welts. The dog that had seemed so dangerous 3 weeks ago now looked pathetic, defeated by creatures a fraction of his size. "Yes," Elena said simply. "He is." Tommy was quiet for a moment, processing this information. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful, lacking any trace of his former stutter. "Mom? Yes, baby? I don't feel sorry for him." Elena looked down at her son, this boy who'd learned hard lessons about justice and consequence, and felt a fierce pride that had nothing to do with maternal instinct and everything to do with respect. "Neither do I," she said. That evening, Elena received a call from David Chen, her attorney. "Elena, I have some interesting news," he said. "Karen Blackwood's lawyer contacted me today. They want to settle." Elena set down her wine glass, suddenly alert. Settle for what? Full medical expenses, pain and suffering, plus a significant amount for Tommy's ongoing therapy and adaptive equipment. It's actually more than I expected to get at trial. What changed their minds? There was a pause. Apparently, Mrs. Blackwood is facing some unexpected financial pressures, property maintenance issues that are affecting her business. She needs this litigation resolved quickly. Elena smiled in the darkness of her porch. Through Karen's windows, she could see her neighbor on the phone, probably begging contractors to work nights and weekends. "That's wonderful news, David." "There is one condition," Chen continued. "They want a mutual non-disclosure agreement. No discussing the case. Publicly, no social media posts, no talking to reporters. Of course, they..." 6 months later, Elena stood in her kitchen making coffee and watching the for sale sign being planted in Karen Blackwood's front yard. The realtor, a nervous-looking woman in a cheap suit, kept glancing toward the backyard as if expecting something to attack her. The fire ant colony had become legendary in their neighborhood. Despite $50,000 in professional treatment, 2 complete soil replacements, and enough pesticide to kill everything within a 3-block radius, the ants had not only survived but thrived. They'd developed resistance to the chemicals, adapted to the soil changes, and spread their territory to include Karen's front landscaping and 3 neighboring properties. The local news had done a feature story on the miracle ants of Maple Street, interviewing frustrated pest control experts who couldn't explain the colony's unprecedented resilience. Elena had watched the segment with Tommy, both of them quietly amazed at what they'd unleashed. "Dr. Martinez?" The voice belonged to Sarah Kim, the new neighbor who'd moved in across the street last month. Elena had helped her identify native plants for her garden, carefully steering her toward species that fire ants found unpalatable. "Good morning, Sarah. I wanted to thank you again for the gardening advice. My roses are doing beautifully." Sarah glanced toward Karen's house, where 2 men in hazmat suits were emerging from the backyard, shaking their heads. "I heard the Blackwood place is finally selling. Any idea who's buying it?" Elena sipped her coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. "I believe it's a property developer, someone who specializes in challenging renovations." What she didn't mention was that the developer was Elena's former colleague, Dr. Marcus Webb, an entomologist who jumped at the chance to purchase prime real estate at 40% below market value. Marcus planned to turn the property into a research station for studying fire ant behavior in suburban environments. Karen's former paradise would become a scientific laboratory, complete with observation towers and underground monitoring systems. The irony was so perfect, Elena had almost felt guilty suggesting it. "Well, I'm sure whoever buys it will fix those pest problems," Sarah said optimistically. Elena smiled. "I'm sure they'll find a way to work with the existing ecosystem." After Sarah left, Elena checked her watch. Tommy would be home from school soon, excited to share news from his robotics club. The settlement money had allowed him to attend Riverside Academy, a private school that specialized in accommodating students with physical differences. Tommy was thriving there, his natural intelligence finally matched with resources that worked around his limitations rather than despite them. He'd also made friends, real friends who didn't pity him or treat him like he was fragile. Last month, his robotics team had won 2nd place in a regional competition, Tommy serving as head programmer despite still struggling with fine motor control. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Rodriguez, Tommy's orthopedic surgeon. Latest X-rays. "Look great. Range of motion improving ahead of schedule. See you next month." It was good news, but Elena knew Tommy would never fully recover. His left hand would always be weaker, his grip less reliable. He'd adapted remarkably well, but the adaptation itself was a testament to what had been taken from him. The front door slammed, followed by Tommy's voice. "Mom! You won't believe what happened at school!" Elena turned as her son burst into the kitchen, backpack flying, his face bright with excitement. At 9 years old, he'd grown 3 inches since the attack, and his confidence had returned in ways that surprised everyone, including his therapists. "Tell me," Elena said, genuinely curious. "Mr. Peterson brought in this guest speaker, a guy who works for the CDC studying invasive species, and he was talking about fire ants, right? About how they're these incredible survivors that can adapt to almost anything." Tommy dropped his backpack and grabbed an apple from the counter, his movements economical and practiced. He'd learned to compensate for his left hand's limitations so smoothly that new acquaintances rarely noticed the difference. "Anyway," Tommy continued, "he mentioned this colony here in our neighborhood. Said it's like nothing they've ever seen. Completely. Resistant to traditional control methods, he called it an evolutionary marvel." Elena raised an eyebrow. "An evolutionary marvel?" "Yeah, he said the ants have developed these incredible survival strategies that scientists are still trying to understand. Like, they've figured out how to neutralize pesticides at the molecular level, and they've created these complex underground networks that can't be disrupted. Tommy took a bite of his apple, chewing thoughtfully. He also said the colony is so successful that other researchers want to study it. Something about how it might teach us new approaches to biological adaptation. Elena felt a flutter of pride that had nothing to do with motherhood and everything to do with professional accomplishment. Her fire ant introduction hadn't just been successful, it had been scientifically significant. "That's fascinating," she said carefully. "The best part?" He said the colony is completely contained. It's aggressive toward threats, but it's not. Actually spreading beyond its established territory, like it's found the perfect habitat and doesn't need to expand. This was news to Elena. She'd expected the ants to continue spreading indefinitely, potentially becoming a neighborhood-wide problem. But apparently, her careful site selection had created something more sophisticated, a stable super colony that defended its territory without overextending. "Oh, and Mom?" Tommy grinned. He said Mrs. Blackwood's old house is being bought by some scientist who wants to turn it into a research station. Isn't that cool? Elena managed to look surprised. "A research station?" "Yeah, the guy said it'll bring jobs to the neighborhood, maybe even attract other research facilities. Could actually increase property values in the long run." Elena blinked. She'd been so focused on destroying Karen's property value that she hadn't considered the broader economic implications. If Marcus succeeded in establishing a legitimate research facility, their entire neighborhood could benefit from the scientific attention. "Tommy," Elena said slowly, "how do you feel about all this? The fire ants, I mean." Her son considered the question with the seriousness he brought to everything these days. "I think," he said finally, "that sometimes bad things lead to good things. Like Mrs. Blackwood was awful and what happened to me was awful, but now there's this amazing colony that scientists want to study, and maybe that research will help people understand how to deal with invasive species better." He paused, looking directly at his mother. "And Mrs. Blackwood had to move away, so her dog can't hurt anyone else." Elena felt her throat tighten. "You don't think what I did was wrong?" Tommy was quiet for a long moment, his young face serious. "I think," he said carefully, "that you protected me the only way you could, and I think Mrs. Blackwood learned something about consequences. What about Bruno? He got hurt too." "Bruno hurt me first," Tommy said simply. "And his owner didn't care. Sometimes animals have to learn the same way people do." That evening, Elena received an unexpected phone call from Marcus Webb. "Elena, I wanted to thank you for the tip about the property," he said. "The colony is even more remarkable than you described. We're finding behavioral patterns that could revolutionize our understanding of eusocial adaptation. I'm glad it's working out." "There's something else," Marcus continued. "The university is interested in establishing a permanent research partnership. This could become a major field station, possibly even attract federal funding. I was wondering if you'd consider joining the project as a consultant." Elena looked out her kitchen window toward the house that had once belonged to Karen Blackwood. Construction crews were already preparing the site for Marcus's research facility, and she could see the distinctive mounds of fire ant activity dotting the landscape like ancient burial sites. "What would that involve?" she asked. "Behavioral analysis, population studies, maybe some genetic sampling to understand how they've developed such remarkable resistance. It's exactly the kind of work you were doing before you moved into administration." Elena closed her eyes, considering the offer. She'd loved fieldwork, missed the thrill of discovery that came with studying nature's solutions to survival challenges, and there was poetic justice in the idea of building a scientific career on the foundation of her revenge. "Marcus," she said finally, "I'd be honored to join the project." After hanging up, Elena found Tommy on the back porch, working on homework with his laptop balanced on his knees. His left hand rested casually on the keyboard, fingers that would never be fully functional but had learned to contribute their own unique value. "How was your day?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. "Good," he said without looking up from his screen. "I've been thinking about the fire ant thing." "What about it?" Tommy saved his work and turned to face her. I want to write my science fair project about invasive species adaptation, about how organisms respond to new environments and develop survival strategies. Elena felt a chill of apprehension. That sounds ambitious. Mr. Peterson said I could interview the CDC guy, maybe even visit the research station when it opens. He thinks I could make it to the state competition. Tommy, are you sure that's a good idea? Her son looked at her with eyes that held too much wisdom for his age. Mom,